In this lecture, I'll go over the fundamentals of financial literacy, and this will consist of defining what a budget is, the 50-30-20 rule, wants and needs, different type of expenses, and all of that. This will cover the basics for now, and this is the first lecture of the series, and get started. The first following topics from here, from defining a budget to paying yourself first. One, two, three, four, five, six. These first six topics will be pretty straightforward, pretty common sense, but it's really crucial for us to understand on how we can utilize these topics. And the last three topics will consist of some basic economic questioning and economic philosophy. Now let us get started. First, the most important thing is, what is a budget? If we want to know how to manage our budget, we first need to define it and question it. Well, let us begin. Well, what is a budget? Now, a budget is essentially a way for you to manage your money. That is it. That is what a budget is. And the way you manage your money is by using this 50-30-20 rule. You don't actually need to go specifically with this rule. You can tailor it towards your needs, but generally the rule of thumb is to use the 50-30-20 rule. And what is the 50-30-20 rule? Well, it's basically where you spend 50% on your needs, you would spend 30% on your wants, and you would spend 20% on your savings. Well, the 50% will be towards your needs. Now, what do needs consist of? Well, this is pretty self-explanatory. You would need this to survive. Well, that would consist of your rent, mortgage, utilities, groceries, and transportation. These are all fundamental aspects that we need to survive. Now, this 30% right here, what would this consist of? These are your wants. What would wants be? Well, for example, it would be entertainment like watching movies, events, or hobbies, shopping or subscriptions towards Netflix, Spotify, etc. And these are your wants. And finally, the 20%, that is your saving. And your savings can consist of a savings account, which we'll talk about later. And in a savings account, you would basically put your money in. So you would have a checking account and a saving account. The way it would work is you put your money from a checking account. This is like your main gateway where all your money is stored. You would put it into a savings account, and it would give you a percentage. Normally, it depends on it depends on the bank, but generally commercial banks, they really have a low APY, which is average percent yield, I believe so. And what you do here is essentially, if you put your money inside this bank, it will give you a return of 3 to 4% per year, meaning that every year your money would compound by 4%. It's generally a good deal, but most commercial banks, they have a really low API of 0.04, something like that. Not sure, but something along the lines of that. So essentially, when you put your money into a savings account, you're saving up for an emergency in the future, and this is generally what you do in an emergency fund. And in an emergency fund, you pretty much are considering the risks that you will need to take in the future, where let's say currently you're at this stage in life where you are approximately like what, 19, 20, 21, you're here and you have an accident here or accident here throughout your life. Well, you don't know when that accident will occur. Well, that's where insurance comes to play. Well, additionally from insurance, what else do you need? Well, you need an emergency fund, and this is where you would utilize your emergency fund. You would utilize your emergency fund by having unplanned expenses that would come along your way from here to here, where your savings account would accumulate that, and from here you can take out some of the money from your emergency fund and then reiterate that process until it's indefinite, where you would always need an emergency fund no matter what. That is the general rule of thumb, where you would put a portion of your savings into an emergency fund. And so there's that. Now we can diversify this a little bit, because not everyone is just gonna put it into a savings account. It sure is a good idea to start off from there, but it's important to diversify and sort of expand your portfolio, because if you're trying to retire, the 3 to 4% API won't really do. And this is where investing comes in, where you can put your money into a brokerage account. A brokerage account is essentially a way where it's a pretty much it's a bank. You can think about all of these as a big banks, where you put your money in a bank and then you choose a stock that you want to buy. You buy the stock or the index fund or whatever, and then you would let the money sit there for about 10 to 20 years, depending on how long you want to invest and your needs and your goals. So there we would have our investment account. So for savings, what you can do is, if you put 20% towards savings, you could diversify this a little bit by putting 10% in a brokerage account, and this can be your personal brokerage account where there's you would use your after-tax money for all of this, and then maybe a portion of that goes towards your Roth IRA. Now, within this, what I would like to explain is when you get your paycheck, you can actually make it go towards your 401k first before you get your paycheck, in a way where you take where the employer and you sort of communicate a way where, okay, you know what, I'm going to take a portion of my paycheck and put it towards a 401k, which is sort of a brokerage account where you would put your money in, but this is before tax. So you put that money in there, and then after that, you would do something along the lines, well, that's not really relevant right now, but we're going to go back towards the main point where, okay, savings, you would put 10% towards a brokerage account, maybe 10% towards a Roth IRA, and let's make this 25, and let's make this 25, that's why it's even. Okay, so essentially, if we have 25% here, maybe we can put 10% here, 10% here, 5% in our emergency fund. Apologize for the handwriting. And as you guys can see, 10%, 10%, and 5% that goes towards savings. That is the essence of it. I will explain more in depth later, but that's the general gist. Now, your needs can consist of various things. I'm going to put an example here of what counts as needs. Your needs consist of rent, mortgages, utilities, groceries, and transportation. These are your need because, well, you need them to survive. You need rent, you pay rent, you pay for utilities, and you pay for transportation, and you pay for groceries. Now, same thing with wants. The same concept, pretty easy to understand. And I'll be doing an example scenario, a very specific example scenario later. But for now, I'm going to put wants here. It's a little bit messy, but I'll be deleting this once I finish this explanation. We're dining out. Maybe you spend roughly $300 on that. You spend about like $50 on subscriptions on Netflix, Spotify, Hulu. $400 on shopping and entertainment, $450. And a lot of people might think, whoa, this is a lot of money, $400 on shopping and $450 on entertainment, right? Well, if we actually break this down, and let's say you're spending money every day on these aspects, right? Now, what would that look like? Well, if you're spending $50 on Netflix or Spotify subscriptions every day, you're pretty much where every day, if we divide this by the amount of days, so every day you are spending $1.6, and $1.6 every day times 30 days. So in a month, you're spending about $50. So it all adds up. Same with shopping. If we divide this by 30, you're essentially spending $13 per day on shopping, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but it does add up. Same with entertainment, same with every other thing here. That's why it's important to budget so we know how much money is going where. There's different apps for that. Later I'll go into detail, but for now we got a good understanding of what needs are, a good understanding of wants are, and a pretty solid understanding of what savings are. Now let's change our topic towards something else, and we are going to be moving on. Now we define what a budget is. We define the 50-30-20 rule. We know. Now we define what wants and needs are because we needed it to differentiate from the 50-30-20 rule. Now we're gonna talk about the different type of expenses. Now, generally we have 1, 2, 3, 4, around 4 to 5, most like 5 common types of expenses. The first one is known as a fixed expense. Now, what is a fixed expense? Well, a fixed expense are pretty much predetermined by someone other than yourself. So it's like a bank or company that tells you, okay, well, for example, let's say that let's take rent into consideration, where you're at an apartment and you pay $800 per month, and it's fixed, right? It doesn't change. Generally, it wouldn't change, so you have to pay $800 per month, and that's the fixed expense. Now we have variable expenses. Now variable expenses are expenses, so it's different from fixed, where you would essentially it would vary month to month, such as like utilities, groceries, or shopping. Now every month, if we include in inflation, if we include in like the price of like certain products, then well, it's gonna vary, and that's why it's variable. We don't know how much it is, and it's gonna vary from a certain range. So there's gonna be a certain range from maybe from $8 to like $10 if we're talking about a certain product or a certain good. Then it's gonna be within this range. So we have a good estimate, and if we do have an estimate, that it's gonna be varying around here. Now, this can also be for like utilities. If you spend more water, if you spend more electricity, then it's going to go up. If you spend less, it's going to go down. That's why it's variable. So these are two expenses. The other expenses that we're going to talk about now are the unit pricing. Now, unit pricing doesn't really involve in the type of expenses, but it's a important supplement that is pretty important to understand. So what unit pricing is it's telling you how much you're paying per ounce, per per ounce, per pound, or per item. So it's telling you what is it in 1 unit. So what does, maybe if you're basically buying, let's say you're buying 3 pieces of chicken, right? And it's like 3 for 1. Now the unit price will tell you how much does it cost for 1 chicken instead of buying 3. And the reason why unit pricing is there is so that it's actually a legal requirement to make sure that there's a clear description on what you're trying to buy, and it gives a clear description by telling you what does 1 unit cost. Now number 4 is going to be planned expenses. Planned expenses are expenses that it's planned that you're going to pop up. It's going to come up, like a car payment, a phone bill, or rent, or a subscription, because if it's a monthly subscription, then you know that it's going to come the following month. Now, number 5 is going to consist of unplanned expenses. Now, what are unplanned expenses? Unplanned expenses are things that come up unexpectedly, like a medical bill, car repair, or maybe like a last minute gift. And because of this is why we have an emergency fund for unplanned expenses and maybe variable expenses where it might go beyond your budget that you use for the 50-30-20 rule. And in that case, you have to use money that is in your savings account. Now, these are the 5 general different type of expenses. Now we're going to move on to saving. Why do we save? How do we save? Now, essentially what saving is, you're using your portion of your income from your checking account and transferring it to your savings account, where some people have an automatic system where they deposit a certain percentage of their paycheck into a savings account. There's like an automatic feature on the app where if you install the bank that you're using and then click on the features that it has, it's pretty simple. You can search it up or watch a tutorial on it. It just shows you how to auto enroll, and by doing this, you don't even have to think about how much time, how much time you get paid. So it just goes in the back of your mind. Now you can save money or you can invest. There's many ways to save money. Most common ways that people do it is by buying property, investing in like the stock market, buying equity, and crypto. Crypto is pretty popular nowadays. Maybe certain commodities, and there we go. And that is the reason why we save money. You save money so you can invest, buy property, and for an emergency purposes, and you save to retire. Generally, that's the main incentive for all of doing this, is where you save money to retire, and to retire and to advance retirement and to save money in a more efficient manner. Then that's why you buy property, you invest, you buy crypto, and all that. Now, the last concept that I'm going to talk about for now is paying yourself first. So what does this mean? This means that you're essentially prioritizing saving money for yourself before paying bills or other expenses. So let's say like you're gonna buy a new laptop and it costs roughly $1,000. Now, what does paying yourself mean? It means that you're saving money to yourself before paying others bills and other expenses. Now, this means that before you're doing all of this processing from the 50-30-20 rule, it's going beyond that. It's going before that. So in this way, it would look something like this, where you get your paycheck, and instead of going directly here, you're putting a portion of your money towards there, and that is paying yourself first because it comes to you first. Now, let's say you want to buy a laptop that you've been waiting for a long time. Now, this is a want still, but we're going to put it in a different trajectory. Now, we have to save up probably like 1,000 per month. I mean, not 1,000 per month. This is how much it's going to cost. Now, let's divide that. Now, this would look something like this, where let's say your pay period is weekly, and then we have bi-weekly. I feel like bi-weekly is the most common, but it varies. And then we have semi-weekly. This is when you get paid, and you get monthly. Now, when you get paid weekly, that's generally like every Friday. Now, what does this mean? Every Friday, you're gonna get paid, and there's about 52 weeks in a year, so there's 52 pay periods. Now, how much are you gonna set aside to your savings account? Well, if you want to buy that laptop, right? So it's actually, instead of going through here, you can actually, in a way, okay, what's happening is you have a paycheck and you're putting it right there. Putting it right there. So this is going here. $1,000. Every Friday you have 52 pay periods, and then you're dividing 1,000 by 52, and that's roughly $20. It's 19.23. $19.23. That's every Friday. So every Friday you set aside $19 into your savings account. That's not a lot if you really think about it. Now, bi-weekly, this is every other Friday. Now, every other Friday, that's going to be 26 weeks. So 26 pay periods in a year. Now we divide 1,000 by 26. And what do we get? We get roughly 38. $12.46. Now, semi-weekly is going to be first 15th of the month. And this will be approximately 24 pay periods, and 1,000 divided by 24 is going to be $41.66. And lastly, monthly. Every first of the month you get paid 12 pay periods, and then we do 1,000 divided by 12. That's roughly $83.33. Now, if we look at it from a 12-month point of view, so every month you contribute $83, it looks like a lot. But generally, if you're get paid bi-weekly, and if you just put $40 per month, then by the end of the year you will have $1,000 to spare. $1,000 towards a new laptop, and that's a pretty good deal in my opinion. It's about how you manage your money, and if you're spending all that money towards something like a subscription, right, or Netflix, Spotify, etc., that adds to $50. That's pretty common for a lot of people on how much they use. And if you just save that $50 per month towards something more useful, perhaps like a hobby or skill, if we multiply that by 12, you're essentially saving $600. And that pretty much explains the concept of paying yourself first. Now, I'll explain the economic concepts now about delayed gratification and impulse spending. Now, in a nutshell, before you spend any money, it's good to actually take it into consideration by having a planned out spreadsheet. And I can do an example right here where I have the category and the amount. So let's say this is Bob, and Bob has around $4,000 after tax, and that's what he needs to spend on his 50, 30, 20 budget. He needs to budget his 4K. And now how does he do that? Well, he spends about 1.2 grand on rent, $200 on utilities, 500 on groceries, transportation, and all that. And if we look at it here, it shows that this adds up to 100% of the pie. Now, the red distribution here shows the 50% of red, so the different color indicates different areas inside the inside the needs. Same with the 30% here, which is the yellow, and then green is the saving right here. So this is 20%, this is 30, and this is 50. Now, if we look at it from here, we see that a lot of portion, we could see it visually. So I would recommend having this visual representation on where your money's going. And instead of seeing the dollars, you can actually see it from a 2D space. So rent's a big chunk, and that you need that to survive. All of this, you need this to survive. But it shows here that you can actually spend less on shopping, spend less on dining out, and then spend less on entertainment, and you're saving a huge chunk of money that can go towards your Roth IRA, your emergency fund, and maybe your debt repayment, because it's really important to pay off your debt first. Now, essentially in delayed gratification and impulse spending, these two fall under the umbrella of discipline, which requires a lot of effort to recognize that what you're doing is rational or irrational, and delayed gratification is you're essentially waiting a set period of time, participating in self-control, realizing that you're at this point in life, and this point you're going to get the reward, and it's about ignoring these smaller checkpoints and going for the big one. That is delayed gratification. Stop spending that $10, stop spending that $20. And right here, you can probably spend $50 and you save that money up. And that's just a very vague example, but the gist. And then that's where impulse spending comes into play. By having this and having this, you get a gist on how much money you're actually spending. And now I'm going to be explaining the final two concepts which go hand in hand: choices and trade-offs, and cost-benefit analysis. So what are choices and trade-offs? So every time you make a choice, there's the consequences. So let's say if I buy a thing, let's say I buy a toy that costs $20. Well, what does that mean? It means that if I buy something for $20, there's always a trade-off. There's always a consequence towards that. And what's that consequence? Well, it's the $20 of labor that I worked for, because I worked for 20 hours. If I get paid $20 per hour, then that's that $20. So every time I buy something, if I buy a toy that's $20 each time, I'm pretty much taking away 1 hour of my life. And that is the point of choice and trade-off. It's where you're essentially, every time you make a choice, it's saying that there's a consequence, there's a trade-off. Now this can be these examples can go beyond just from monetary value. Let's say it can be conceptual too. So if I wake up an hour late and I don't study, well, what's the trade-off? Well, the trade-off is that, so the choice I made was to sleep 1 hour late, and instead of waking up at 8, I wake up at 9, and I'm late to school. So the choice is I get an extra hour of sleep. What's the trade-off? I'm late to school. I don't study in that 1 hour. I don't listen to the class lecture for that time, and that is a trade-off. So the whole point of choice and trade-off is to understand and pretty much manage your risk on, okay, is this choice actually optimal for me? Is this sufficient for me? Or should I sacrifice this choice and make this trade-off because this trade-off is better for me? Now, this is where cost benefit analysis comes into play. And cost benefit analysis is in saying where when you have choice and trade-off, you're essentially saying that you have a cost and you have an effect. You're not actually analyzing that. Cost benefit analysis is where you analyze the choice and trade-off, where instead of just realizing the cause and effect, is you're sort of thinking the way through. You're doing second level thinking where, okay, I made this choice, I made this trade-off. How do I make X? So if we have X and Y, how do I make X better, and how do we make Y better, and how do we utilize both ways on how do we mitigate the trade-off to make the best choice possible? And that is sort of what cost benefit analysis.